Welcome everyone to my talk about front-end development. My name's Fynn. I'm a staff engineer at Halo. I have been working there for the last almost 10 years now. Officially, I'm still a full-stack developer, but for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I've been working mostly exclusively on the front-end side. And yeah, that's why I'm talking about front-end today. More specifically, about the complexity in the front-end development. Complexity, this weird thing where you put together some pieces to a new, bigger thing, and then suddenly it's more complicated and convoluted than the sum of its pieces. And that's what's happening on the front-end side in the past years. It's never been a more controversial, more cooler topic to work in. The complexity not only comes from within, from like project requirements, from intrinsic internal difficulties that we have to face, but also from external factors, from the environment, from the huge space that we are acting in. And that's mainly because not only for the recent years, but for quite some years now, the web is changing. We all know that. It started off like just basically as a huge collection of documents. And now it's becoming this application platform. So all tools, all applications, all websites that we are now building are basically trying to mimic the behavior of desktop applications. And that obviously increases the requirements that we need to tackle in our job. So this complexity somehow seems to shift. It started off mainly in the back end. I think it's fair to say that it's shifting towards the front end. It's never been easier to spin up a Firebase or a data-driven API and have some no-code platforms do the back-end work, and then we are facing a lot of challenges in the front-end side. And yeah, that's basically where we are now. So Marco Arment once said, it's a couple of years ago, but I think it still holds true, web development has never been more complicated or convoluted than it is today due to the sheer quantity of tools that we have to our disposal on the daily work, and also the rapid rate of change that we have within those tools. If we look at the results of the latest State of JavaScript developer survey, that is 2022. I think 23 is not released yet. You can see that the number of front-end frameworks that we have to choose or can choose from if we start a new project is like growing every year. So every year there are new. Obviously, that also big players that stick around for quite some time. But we also have new players on the market every year that also stick around and have more possibilities to choose from every day. And that is even more complex if you look at the ecosystem growth, if you look at the number of libraries that we can choose from. So this is from the modules count. If you look at the different packages, or the packages in the different registries for the different languages, you can see that NPM Node JavaScript like dominates that, and it looks fundamentally different than the other package registries. It's not totally fair, obviously, because in NPM you have a lot of backend packages nowadays as well. But still, the core message is still this is an exponential curve in contrast to the others. And if you look at the numbers, that is something different. So NPM has almost 900 new packages every day. The others are far below that. And that obviously makes our job not always easier and makes it harder sometimes. So why is that? All of those trends, we are looking here at not a timeline of a year or something, but a little bit bigger. What are the trends that have created this perfect storm for web development? Obviously, the first one is that we have a huge diversification of different devices that we need to cater for. Unless you have some very specific application that you're building, you are faced with a lot of variation in the screen size, in the latency that you're working with, the bandwidth. Users expect that your web application is just working on a 3G connection on a crappy old phone, just like it is working somewhere on a high-speed corporate Ethernet connection. So it just needs to work every day, every time, on every device. Secondly, there's a high level of uncertainty. Some of the web technologies are still maturing, and this change is everywhere. And I've already shown it to you. There's an increasing number of packages every day and frameworks to choose from, and this change obviously sparks controversy. And you can see different talks about how you should do things, what is the best practice to do what, and people can usually not align on a common trend there. We have, as a third point, a huge market growth. If you look back in 2010, there was roughly 2 billion people connected to the internet. That has more than doubled. Almost 5 billion people now. If you look at the numbers, that trend obviously also increases during the pandemic, or increased during the pandemic. People are working from home. People are working from mobile, like from outside, whatever. So this trend line is even accelerating. And then the last one, raising bar for quality. I've already said it. The users expect the applications just to work, and they expect them to work just as they are, as they know it from native applications. We're not talking about documents now anymore. We're not talking about websites. We're talking about web applications. And the UI, the UX becomes more and more a differentiator for your web applications. So if we look at the really grand scale of that, back in the 1990s, you can roughly say that there are three phases to a lot of languages, not only JavaScript, but also other languages. And there's a first phase where people are building the language, and then the second phase where they're exploring what is possible with that language. And you see that this on the y-axis is the innovation rate. So when people start to pick up the language, they start to play around with it, start to try, what can I do with that? And then suddenly, or not suddenly, but slowly, the innovation rate declines a bit, and the tools are refined. There are best practices in place. There are big players on the market, and that's what we've seen in the last years. With JavaScript, it's slowly consolidating. Even though I said there's a huge number of frameworks to choose from, we can see that this massive growth is slowly declining and consolidating and refining. So that does not necessarily also apply to CSS. CSS always the unloved child of web development. So we can see that the development of CSS itself is changing. For quite some time, the innovation that happened on the CSS level happened not in the CSS core language. It happened somewhere else. We were using preprocessors. We were using JavaScript frameworks to do the stuff that CSS was not capable to do. And so over the last years, there's been a lot of improvement going on in the CSS language itself, helping us to build those languages, to build those applications, and also to achieve what our users now expect from us in building web applications. So yeah, the language itself is maturing in some sense. There's a lot of features that have been added over the past years, helping us with specific problems. They are really targeted towards specific things that we as front-end developers face every day. Yeah, not most of those things might be heard of. CSS variables on the top right there, anchor positioning, something very new, which will probably help us build tooltips. There's a lot of things. Sadly, most of them are not really in use or not even heard of by web developers. So that has an effect on the CSS, on the language itself. You can see, sadly, for the 2022, they have not asked that question, is CSS easy to learn? But if you look at the 2021 and the past years of that state of CSS survey, developer survey, you can see that the amount of people that agree, that strongly agree that CSS is easy to learn, declined from like 25% to below 7, or yeah, below 8%, 7.6%. So there's obviously something happening in the CSS language that makes it more complex. So let's, just as we have looked at the JavaScript, let's take a look at the CSS. What sparked this this change? Or what indicates that the language is actually changing? First thing, there's a lot of open requirements currently. They have done quite a good job to cater or implement the stuff that was actually demanded by the developers, but there's still a very long list of open requirements in the CSS spec that people want to implement. I don't know, masonry layouts, wrapping detection, scoping, mix-ins, decent color functions. A lot of that stuff is still missing, still makes it complicated to build web applications in a decent manner. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of things that have been implemented over the last couple of years. And those things are really cool. They're really interesting. We have container queries right now in place, something that we always shouted for like ages. I don't know. Cascade layers, I don't know who has used that already. Makes it far easier to work with complex code bases. Native nesting is finally arriving in CSS, so we don't need preprocessors anymore, with in quotes. We don't need that anymore, and maybe we see conditionals arriving in quite some time. Let's see. Next thing, Houdini. I don't know how many of you have heard of Houdini. Quick hands up, who has heard of Houdini? Who knows? Okay, it's quite a few. So Houdini is that, we can have a short sidetrack here. So who is Houdini? Houdini is a task force, and the goal of that task force is to make the CSS language extendable, like the core language, make it extendable. As an example, take a look at how usually the current process is if you're missing a feature in CSS and you propose that feature. You may write a specification, then you wait until that specification gets implemented, then you need to wait until the browsers adopt that so that you can actually start using it, and that usually takes years. So by the time that feature becomes available, you have almost certainly already finished your project. Why is that not a problem in JavaScript? In JavaScript, it's a little bit easier. You propose a feature, and then if the language does not support it, you write a polyfill, and then you start using it. So that's a matter of days usually, if you know what you're doing. So The problem with CSS is that JavaScript cannot, or you as a developer cannot easily write a polyfill. There's a very limited set of things that you can actually access via JavaScript. You can access the DOM. You can, for some parts, you can also access the CSS object model. But then how the browser actually layouts the page and paints it and composites it, you don't have any access to that. So you can then write a CSS, a JavaScript polyfill, and the entire rendering process is re-triggered, and that's usually quite costly. So Houdini is trying to make all of those steps available to you as a developer, so that you can actually start with the CSS parsing API. So you can have custom language elements that you want to add to the core language. And then also, I don't know, dig into the layouting and painting of the browser. So having that will definitely change once that arrives, and once they finish that. Obviously, it's an incremental process, but once they finish that, that will definitely change the way we are writing CSS right now. And yeah, last but not least, we are in a better situation than we are a couple of years ago. Basically, all of the browsers out there are now evergreen browsers, meaning the users are not like required to manually update their browser. The browser does it automatically for them, which for us is a good situation because the adoption becomes much easier. If there's a new thing out there that browsers are implementing, that gets distributed quite fast, and users tend to have more modern browsers that we have and that they had, I don't know, years ago. Looking at you, Internet Explorer. So why is it still that CSS is like, yeah, as I said before, the unloved child of web development? Why is it that so many web developers still find CSS frustrating to work with? Why do they think it's broken? Why is it never the correct tool to use for the web application that they are currently using or developing? Let me try and give some advice of how we need to approach CSS and HTML for that matter to excel in the entire space of web development. So I think we all need to change the way that we understand and develop HTML and CSS in specific to change this. The first thing is that we kind of need to acknowledge as web developers that yes, CSS is quite simple. If we take a look at that code snippet there, and I show it to, I don't know, someone who has never done web development, they can pretty sure tell you what that text box will look like. So it's an incredible easy language to learn. There's a very limited set of language features and language syntax that we need to learn. But that does not necessarily mean that it's easy. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. There are a few things that you can do, obviously, but building like grid layouts and like there's hundreds of other examples. You can today do some pretty exciting stuff with just CSS, and web developers still tend to solve those things with JavaScript. So what can we do about it? The first advice that I would give is that we as web developers, we need to know the tools that we're working with every day. So take a look at, I don't know, the CSS box model. Take a look at how specificity actually works. Start using and embracing Flexbox. Stop using, I don't know, margins and paddings everywhere. Use the right tools for the right things. And also be very careful of what you build on top of CSS, what you use on top of CSS. Usually you will still today probably use a preprocessor or use CSS and JS or something, but all of that adds another layer and another layer of complexity on top of the language. Second advice: stay up to date with what is coming with the language. I've said that we're now in a situation where the browser adoption is quite fast due to evergreen browsers. So the things that have been added over the last 1 or 2 years, CSS properties, Shadow DOM, the View Transition API, all of that makes developing web applications, cool web applications that really feel as native applications. That makes it so much easier, and you don't necessarily need JavaScript to solve those problems. Next advice, writing styles and writing CSS is there to create and build layouts. Obviously, you're also using CSS to build your atomic components that you use, your buttons and whatever. But that should be a one-time effort. You should do that once and then basically not touch it again. And then you use CSS to arrange and set your layout. You're not touching those atomic your atomic components in every use case where you're using them, because that exactly makes CSS not maintainable. We still have very little tools to work with in CSS. Like we cannot easily detect what is unused. We cannot easily see what is technically not valid CSS because the browsers are still rendering that for us. Yeah. Just try to be very conscious about what is the actual thing that I'm currently building and what are the atomic components that I'm using for it. And I don't want to adjust those every time in every single use case. Having said that, staying consistent, I think that's one of the key problems in many projects. Staying consistent means you're staying maintainable. It's easy to quickly write some CSS and write CSS on top of CSS and then add more CSS if it looks bad. But that at some point explodes. And that not only applies to web developers, that also applies to designers. You as a designer are also like at the forefront of that. You need to build designs that adhere to the rules that you've set in the beginning. Get yourself a design system or get yourself a basic rule of what you want to follow and then stick to that. You can, of course, start micro-designing everything, but 99% of the companies out there won't have enough money and just money and time to micro design every single page. So yeah, get the foundation right and then start building on top of that and staying on top of that. Next thing, develop styles following your intent. That not only applies to writing CSS, that also applies to writing HTML. So I've seen a lot of HTML and CSS code where people just start writing the HTML in a way so that it looks good in the end. They start writing the HTML based on how the element looks. And that's not necessarily how you should tackle that problem. HTML is a markup language. It's not a design language. So if you want to place a headline and you want to have that in a specific size, then just not pick like an H4 because you need it a little bit smaller than the other one. Still stick to that semantics. That also helps you with accessibility. And then use the language that is actually made for this, namely CSS, to then style that headline, or stick to your design system and see how big does it need to be, and then use it to that matter. Yeah, I've already said it. Like really modern CSS can do astonishingly much for you, and a lot of the web developers tend to write CSS like it used to be 10 years ago. They know that the basic tool set they've learned and yeah, acknowledge that for quite some time, and then they don't look at what's new. They just know this is what I can achieve, and for the other stuff I'm using JavaScript. Yeah, and also on there, don't use it with trial and error. I see a lot of code where you're adding CSS on top of CSS, and then it's still not looking good, and then people start chucking more CSS on top of that, and at some point you're losing track of what's actually influencing which element. Yeah, so maybe that's one of the most important things. We should, as web developers, accept CSS and HTML as like an integral part of building web applications. It's not, you're not a good web developer if you're a JS geek, if you know your way how to code in JS, but you have no clue what you're doing in HTML and CSS. And that's yeah, a lot of developers we see out there are exactly this. They define being a senior web developer by being good at writing JavaScript code, and still the CSS and HTML they are writing sucks. And at some point, you then you cannot cope with that. If your foundation is rotten, you're not able to change that by chucking some JavaScript on top of that. So yeah, stop looking at CSS at the latest stage of your web development. So take it into account from the beginning and use it, and use the modern tools that we have nowadays. Because that will actually save you a lot of time and a lot of bugs in the end. All in all, I think that was already the core message, is like we need to rethink front-end development in the sense that we need to accept the entirety of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS as like a holistic field. All of them have a decent say of what you're doing, and you won't excel in the field if you only accept JavaScript as like your horse to ride on. You also need to be sufficiently fluent in HTML and CSS. And if you're not doing that, if you keep, I think it's on that slide, yes. If you keep bashing CSS because it's like what you're doing as a web developer, similar to what we've seen with, I don't know, PHP 10 years ago, or the Internet Explorer, I already did it. If you keep bashing CSS just for the sake of it and not accept it as part of your job, that's becoming a problem at some stage. So yeah, I think that's already the main message that I wanted to get across. Hopefully, is that it's an entire field, it's a holistic field, and only if we look at all three parts, or possibly more parts, then we are going to build great applications that stick around, that last, and that bring joy to the users. And yeah, that already brings me to the end of the talk. I think I'm quite on time, yeah. So thanks for listening, and have a great Code Talks.